In this tutorial, I want to talk about how to use Async Await and Azure. Now, if you already know about Azure, or to be honest, you're not that interested in Azure, then I would recommend you skip this video, move on to the next one, which concentrates purely on the Async Await and Unity. However, if you've got some interest in Azure, or you just want to follow along, then feel free to watch this episode, and then you can watch the continuation, which will be mostly focused, as I say, on Async Await in Unity. Enjoy. So what this isn't is an introduction to Azure. So if you want to do that, then I would come to the Blob Storage Quick Starts guide here. So this is the documentation. Just search for Azure Storage, you'll find it. And this explains what the Azure portal is, what blobs are, all the various kind of Azure foundational stuff around storage. And again, this isn't what this is. This isn't a tutorial about Azure. This is a tutorial about how to get Azure working with Unity. So I'll leave you up to you to go through all of that. One thing I would recommend though is the Storage Explorer. I would download that. That makes life a lot easier. And also something in here that might not be immediately obvious. So I'm going to look for it here. Make sure I've got the documentation. Azure Storage Emulator. So the Azure Storage Emulator is a really nice little tool. So you can just type in Azure Storage Emulator and it starts running. And this pretends to be the full-fledged Azure, but running on your local machine. So you won't incur any kind of network costs or anything like that. So it's a nice way just to get started. But the main difference here is you need to find out what the connection string is to the emulator. So once you've installed the emulator, you can code against it. You can authorize requests against storage using a shared key authentication or shared access. The emulator supports a single fixed account with a well-known authentication key. So basically they're saying that this is always going to be the same for the emulator. And I mentioned before that we have a mechanism of connecting to Azure, and in here it's showing us this is how we should use the emulator. So you just say use development storage equals true. So that is what we're going to do next. So I'm going to come into my demo, and where we've got this URI, I'm going to look at using new URI, use development storage equals true. I won't do a delete this time. What else can we do? We could do a Blob client, Blob container name. Go back to the documentation, Blob container client. Okay, forget Blob container client. Let's do that one. Start using some proper using statements. Get rid of all of this, don't need that. Just bring in the using statement for that. Okay, and we need to put in the container name. So if I bring up my emulator now, or sorry, my emulator is running. Don't need to see that, it just is running. We bring up the storage Explorer. So here's my local unattached, my emulator. I can see I've got blob containers, queues and tables in here. So if I open up the blob containers, I can see I've got something called quiz. And what I want to do is create a new blob container and call it aircraft. Okay, so this is basically like a folder, and the folder is called aircraft. So I'll come in here now and say aircraft. convert from string URI to string. Does this want a string then? Okay. Nice and consistent there. Right. So then we can just do print container name, and we can see whether this works. Okay. Extension. Are you missing a directive? Right. Okay. So the idea here, the Azure test is going to run. We're going to go to the container client. The container client is using our emulator. Our emulator should have a folder or to use its correct term, a container called aircraft. So we should just see aircraft coming out of here if this has worked. So let's go into Unity. And run that. So we've got a format exception here. Let's have a look at that. Okay, I think it's been very picky. Okay, good. So container name is aircraft. So we're getting somewhere. We're now communicating with Azure, even if it is just our emulator. But that's good enough. It will work with a real thing. So what now? So I've called this aircraft, and I want to put something in there that is kind of related to an aircraft. So I'm going to just bring up Notepad. I'll create one actually. Let's just go into Visual Studio and we'll say file new, file. I don't think there's a JSON template specifically. Is there? There is. Cool. And let's just say, what's an aircraft going to consist of? Let's give it some sort of, we'll have a name. We can call this, what should we call it? I'll make up a name, Tempest. And we're going to say, we'll have a speed, say that's 405, whatever's. Okay, so that's a sort of basic piece of data. And I'm going to, let's just create a new folder in here. Just call it data and call it Tempest. So then we can come into our Explorer, and now just checking we are in our aircraft container, that's fine. So then we can press upload files. Upload. Okay, so that's transferring it up, and there we are. We have our file in Azure Storage, and it's a term blob. That's fine. And so we can download this if we wish. So we just press the download button, and you can download it to a folder. So see here, it's copied it down into temp. You can open the folder, and there's our JSON file. But we don't want to do that because that's not how we want to use it in our software. So we've got a JSON file. Now we need to be able to consume this as an aircraft. So if we go to our Unity assets, you can see we've got not a lot of scripts in here. So I think what I'll do is we'll come into Azure and we'll create some folders. And let's create a folder called data. Oh, models. Let's call it models. And let's create a new C# script. And it's going to be called aircraft. Now I don't want this to be a mono behavior because it's just going to be a model for the data. So how do I get from this JSON into here? Well, that's not too bad. So we just copy that and we come up into edit, paste special, paste JSON as classes. So that gives us our kind of foundational properties. Let's tidy that up. Great. So we've got our aircraft. So now we need to fetch it. So back into our test. So we've got our container and now we want to actually get some stuff from it. So we can do client dot. Now if we knew what the name of it was, we could say get it directly, but let's just say we know that there's a list of things in there, but we're not too sure what they are. So we can use get blobs by hierarchy, which allows you to get it at a particular sort of point in the tree, or you can just say get the blobs, which will get all the blobs from that particular folder that we're in. So that's the only thing we need at the moment. Let's just bring this using statement in. Again, don't worry too much about what these particular properties are. This is just really about how these works in Unity. Okay, so we don't want any blob states. We don't want to use a cancellation token. In fact, we don't need any of these. We just get all the blobs. And what does this return? So this returns a pageable blob item. Now, pageable is quite peculiar. It's a relatively new thing for Azure, and the syntax is going to look a little bit odd. So this is a Azure pageable blob item. So what we can do is we can say, so this get blobs is trying to return a page. So what we want to do is we want to get these as pages of items. So we can say, for example, that we want to get a certain number of items. So we could say things like page size, hint, I want to get 10 items per page. That's kind of handy because when you're dealing with services like Azure, you don't want to just download a whole load of data. You want to be able to do it in smaller chunks, or as they're calling them here, pages. So then we can do a for each over these basically pages of items. And then we've got the values that are inside that page. So the values should be giving us back our blob items. So it's a list of the actual items. So then we can do for each item in page values. So just to go over that again, we're going through the pages of the items, and then we're going to go through each item that's in that page. Now that item is a blob item. So let's just call it that. Keyboard's not working. Come on, keyboard. There we go. Blob item. So let's just have a look at the name of the blob item just to see whether it's working or not. We'll just print that out. Right. Oops. So let's see how we get on with that. Okay, so we got our container called aircraft, and it's found the Tempest file inside of it. So that's good. It all seems like that is working as we'd expect. So the next issue here is that we're going to want to get data from that and then get it from our model. So what we need to do here is download the data. So we've got this sort of metadata about the Azure items. Now we actually want to ask Azure to fetch the data for us. So there are a couple of ways you can get around this or do this. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the client and ask it to do download. So I should be able to get the blob. So we've got a blob container client. Now I actually want the blob client. So the blob name, we know that. So we can just get that from here. But let's make that a bit more explicit here. Let's call this container client. So now we've got the blob client. Now we can ask the blob client to do the work. So we just want to download it. Yeah, it's going to get a response object. Okay, and download response object. We want its value. And in the value, there will be the content. So obviously I should do a load of null checks here, right? But just for the sake of getting this tutorial up and running, let's zoom through this. So as the content is a stream, you can see here, we want to use a using statement to read that stream. And so we want to get a reader. And let's create a new stream reader. I won't have a reference to that yet, so let's grab that. New stream reader. We're going to read the stream into it. Okay, so again, this isn't a tutorial about Azure particularly. I want to try and get off this as quickly as I can and get onto the Unity aspects. So, okay, let's just get some JSON from that. So, reader, read all, okay, read to end. And then we can use the Unity's mechanisms to actually fetch that. But what I will do instead, should I do that right now? Yeah, let's do that right now. So we can use the Json Utility from JSON, and we want to get it into aircraft. Aircraft equals that, and then we can do something like print. If I do aircraft toString, just do that, and let's just check aircraft a second. So one of the things that's peculiar about the way JSON Utility works is it doesn't work on properties because of the way the serialization works. So we just need to get rid of these and just make them public fields. And also I'll just override the toString. And you're supposed to override base as well when you do that, the hash, but I'm being lazy today. So print dollar. Actually, I don't print, I want to return. And it is going to be name, speed. Okay, so I think that's all there. The using statement can be simplified. Can it really? Okay. Oh, okay, interesting. How does it know when it goes out of scope? Interesting. Not seen that syntax before. Right. Let's run that up. Okay, so got a container, got the file, and now we've deserialized the aircraft and are able to access its properties as if it's an object, as if it's an instance of a class. So that's a kind of basic, very quick. Okay, so Azure is working kind of a test.